The distress signal had been calling out into the void for 300 years, and Commander Elena Vasquez was finally going to answer it. She stood at the bridge of the deep space research vessel Adamantine, her dark eyes fixed on the frozen moon that hung in the blackness before them. Kithrix was a world of eternal ice, a shell of frozen water hiding an ocean that went deeper than any human had ever explored before. Beneath that ice lay mysteries that had swallowed entire alien fleets without a trace. "Commander, we are receiving updated data from the Galactic Council," said Lieutenant Marcus Cole, his fingers dancing across the engineering console. He was a big man with hands that could crush metal, yet those same hands could repair the most delicate systems with surgical precision. Vasquez turned to face her crew. There were 6 of them in total, the finest specialists humanity had to offer for this impossible mission. Besides Cole, there was Dr. Yuki Tanaka, their xenobiologist and medical officer, whose brilliant mind had unlocked secrets of alien life that others thought impossible. There was Sergeant James Okonkwo, weapons specialist and former soldier, whose calm demeanor hid a warrior's heart. There was Dr. Sarah Chun, their pilot and navigator, who could fly through an asteroid field blindfolded. And there was young technician Alex Rivera, barely 22 years old, but already a genius with communication systems. The 6th member of their crew was not human at all. Sorowan was a Vethkai, a tall and slender being with pale blue skin and 4 eyes that blinked in sequence when he was nervous. Right now, all 4 of those eyes were blinking very fast indeed. "The Council data confirms what we already suspected," Cole continued, his voice grim. 47 expeditions have been sent to Kithrix over the past 1,000 years. None of them ever came back. 47 expeditions from 12 different species, Sorowan added, his translator giving his words a musical quality that did not match the fear in his eyes. "My own people sent 3 ships with our finest warriors. We recovered nothing but silence and the echo of their final screams." Vasquez nodded slowly, taking in this information without letting it shake her resolve. The Galactic Council had begged humanity not to attempt this mission. They had called humans reckless and foolish and said that some mysteries were better left unsolved. But humanity had not conquered the stars by playing it safe, and they were not about to start now. "What do we know about what is down there?" asked Dr. Tanaka, her voice steady despite the tension that filled the bridge. Sorowan's 4 eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, they held the weight of ancient grief. "We call it the Hollow," he said quietly. "It is a creature of the deepest darkness, a predator that has existed since before my species learned to walk upright. It does not simply kill its prey. It breaks them first, filling their minds with such terror that they go mad before they die. No species has ever survived an encounter with the Hollow. No species has ever escaped the depths of Kithrix." A heavy silence fell over the bridge. Rivera shifted nervously at his station, his young face pale. Even Okonkwo, who had faced death more times than he could count, looked troubled by the alien's words. But Vasquez felt something else entirely. She felt the fire of determination burning in her chest. The same fire that had driven humanity out of the caves and across the oceans and into the endless black of space. Fear was there too, of course. She would be a fool not to feel afraid. But fear had never stopped a human before, and it was not going to stop her now. "Take us in, Dr. Chun," she commanded. "Begin descent protocols." Chun's hands moved across the controls with practiced ease, and the Adamant began its approach to the frozen moon. The ship was built for this kind of mission, reinforced against crushing pressures and equipped with lights powerful enough to pierce the deepest darkness. If any vessel could survive the depths of Kithrix, it was this one. The descent through the atmosphere was smooth, and soon they were hovering above the endless plain of ice that covered the moon's surface. Sensors identified a weak point in the shell, a place where the ice was thin enough for them to break through, and Chun guided the ship toward it with expert precision. "Activating thermal lance," Cole announced, and a beam of concentrated heat shot from the adamantin's nose, cutting through the ice like a knife through butter. Steam billowed around them as the frozen water vaporized, creating a tunnel that led down into the unknown. The ship descended into the hole, surrounded by walls of ancient ice that glowed blue in the light of their engines. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like entering the throat of some enormous frozen beast. And then they broke through into open water. The ocean of Cathorax stretched out before them, a void of absolute blackness that made space itself seem bright by comparison. The adamantin's floodlights stabbed into the darkness, illuminating only a tiny sphere around the ship. Beyond that sphere, there was nothing but the endless dark. "Beginning descent," Chun reported, her voice tight. "Current depth is 500 meters and increasing." They sank deeper and deeper, the pressure climbing steadily as the frozen surface fell away above them. At 2 kilometers, they began to see the first signs of life. Strange creatures drifted past their viewports, beings of bioluminescent light that pulsed with colors no human eye had ever seen before. Some were beautiful, delicate things like floating flowers. Others were clearly predators, their bodies covered in spines and teeth that gleamed in the ship's lights. "Fascinating," Tanaka breathed, recording everything with eager eyes. "The biodiversity here is incredible." But Sauron was not looking at the creatures with wonder. He was looking at them with dread. "These are only the surface dwellers," he whispered. "The things that live in the true depths are far worse." At 10 kilometers, they found the first wreckage. It was a Vethkai ship, or what remained of one. The hull had been torn open like paper, the metal twisted and bent by forces that should have been impossible. Bodies floated in the water around it, preserved by the cold, their faces frozen in expressions of absolute terror. At 20 kilometers, they found more wrecks. Ships from a dozen different species, all of them destroyed in the same brutal fashion. It was a graveyard of failed expeditions, a monument to the horror that waited below. At 40 kilometers, something moved in the darkness beyond their lights. It was vast, so vast that their sensors could not determine its true size. It was shadow given form, darkness given hunger. And as it turned its attention toward the tiny ship that had dared to enter its domain, Commander Vasquez felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The Hollow had found them, and now the true terror was about to begin. One moment the adamantin was descending through the black water, its lights cutting weak paths through the endless dark. The next moment, something massive slammed into the ship with the force of a colliding asteroid. Commander Vasquez was thrown from her feet as the vessel spun wildly. Alarms screamed through the corridors and red emergency lights painted everything in the color of blood. She grabbed the edge of her command chair and pulled herself upright, shouting orders even as her mind struggled to process what was happening. "Report," she bellowed over the chaos. "Hull breach on Deck 3. Cole shouted back, his massive frame braced against his console. "Something is tearing through the outer plating like it is made of paper." Through the viewport, Vasquez caught her first real glimpse of their attacker. It was a nightmare given flesh, a mountain of chitinous tendrils and gaping mouths that seemed to stretch on forever. Eyes covered its body, thousands upon thousands of them, all glowing with a sickly yellow light. And those eyes were all fixed on the tiny ship that had dared to enter its territory. "All hands, seal pressure suits," Vasquez commanded. "Okonkwo, get to the armory and bring everything we have. Chen, get us moving." But before anyone could respond, something else happened. Something far worse than the physical attack. The Hollow reached into their minds. It was like a wave of pure terror crashing through Vasquez's consciousness. Suddenly she was drowning, water filling her lungs as she sank into endless darkness. She was being eaten alive, feeling teeth tear through her flesh. She was watching her crew die one by one, helpless to save them. Every fear she had ever known, every nightmare she had ever suffered, all of it came flooding back at once with 10 times the intensity. Around her, she could hear her crew screaming. Rivara had collapsed to the floor, curling into a ball with his hands pressed against his temples. Tanaka was gripping her console so hard that her knuckles had turned white. Even Okonkwo, the fearless warrior, had fallen to his knees with a look of absolute horror on his face. And Sorowin. The alien was the worst of all. He had gone completely still, his 4 eyes wide and empty, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream. The psychic assault had already broken him, just as it had broken every member of his species who had come before. This was how the Hollow killed its prey. Not with teeth and claws, but with fear itself. It flooded their minds with terror until they could no longer think, until they could no longer fight back, until they simply gave up and let death take them. But Commander Elena Vasquez was not going to give up. With a roar of defiance that came from somewhere deep inside her soul, she forced herself to her feet. Yes, she was afraid. Yes, the terror was almost too much to bear. But she had been afraid before. She had faced fear her entire life, and she had never let it stop her. Get up! She screamed at her crew, her voice cutting through the psychic noise like a blade. Get up and fight. And something incredible happened. Her crew began to respond. Cole was the first to move, shaking his head like a man waking from a bad dream. Tears were streaming down his face, but his hands were steady as he turned back to his console. Rerouting power to the engines, he growled through gritted teeth. Tanaka followed, pushing herself upright with a gasp. Her whole body was trembling, but her eyes were focused, her brilliant mind already working on the problem at hand. I can synthesize a sedative, she said, her voice shaking. Something to dull the psychic effects. Chung grabbed the flight controls and hauled the ship into a desperate turn. I can fly through fear, she declared, sweat pouring down her face. I have been doing it my whole career. Even Rivera managed to pull himself off the floor. His young face streaked with tears, but his jaw set with determination. Communications are still online, he reported. I can try to jam its psychic frequency. Okonkwo simply grabbed his weapon and headed for the door. He did not say a word. He did not need to. The look in his eyes said everything. The Hollow seemed almost surprised by their resistance. Its mental assault intensified, hitting them with wave after wave of pure psychological horror. But the humans kept fighting, kept moving, kept refusing to surrender. Then came the physical attack. A massive tendril punched through the hull on Deck 3, flooding the corridor with freezing water. 2 crew members were caught in the breach. Ensign Williams and Technician Park, both swept away into the darkness before anyone could reach them. Their screams cut off abruptly as the Hollow claimed its first victims. No! Vasquez shouted, rage mixing with her grief. They were her people, her responsibility, and she had just watched them die. But she could not stop to mourn. Another tendril was forcing its way through the breach, widening the hole, letting more water pour in. If they did not seal it now, the entire ship would be flooded in minutes. Cole was already running toward the breach, grabbing emergency sealant as he went. The water was waist-deep by the time he reached the corridor, ice cold and rising fast. The tendril was still pushing through, still trying to tear the ship apart. And Marcus Cole did something that would have seemed impossible to any other species in the galaxy. He threw himself against the breach, pressing his own body against the gap, using his flesh and bone to hold back the ocean, while his hands worked frantically to apply the sealant. The cold was killing him. He could feel his body going numb, feel his heart struggling to beat. The tendril was pressing against him, trying to push him aside, trying to finish what it had started. And the psychic assault was still hammering at his mind, filling him with visions of drowning and death. But he held on. He held on because his crew needed him. He held on because giving up was not something humans knew how to do. He held on until the sealant hardened and the breach was closed and the water stopped rising. When his crewmates finally pulled him away from the wall, Cole was barely conscious. His skin was blue with cold and his breath was coming in shallow gasps. But he was alive, and so was the ship. Sauron watched all of this with eyes that could not believe what they were seeing. In his experience, in the experience of every species that had ever faced the Hollow, this was supposed to be the part where the prey gave up and died. These soft, fragile creatures with their weak bodies and their short lifespans should have been broken by now. But they were not broken. They were not even close to broken. They were afraid, and they were hurting, and they had already lost 2 of their own. But they were still fighting with everything they had. How? The alien whispered, his voice filled with wonder and confusion. How are you still standing? Vasquez looked at him with eyes that burned with fierce determination despite the tears that filled them. Because we are human, she said simply. And humans do not know how to quit. The adamantine dove deeper into the darkness, fleeing from the monster that pursued them. The Hollow followed, confused by prey that did not behave like prey. And the true battle was only just beginning. 70 kilometers beneath the surface of Kithra Ix, the adamantine had found a temporary hiding place. They had discovered a vast underwater cavern, a pocket of space carved into the rock of the moon's core. The entrance was narrow, too narrow for the Hollow to follow, and for the moment they were safe. But they all knew that safety would not last forever. Commander Vasquez stood in the center of the common room, looking at what remained of her crew. Cole was wrapped in thermal blankets, still recovering from his near-death experience at the breach. Tanaka was working furiously at her portable lab station, analyzing samples she had collected from the water. Chun was running diagnostics on the damaged ship. Rivera was trying to boost their communications array. And Okonkwo was taking inventory of their weapons, which did not take long because they did not have many. Sauron sat apart from the others, his 4 eyes staring at nothing. The alien had barely spoken since the attack, and Vasquez suspected he was still struggling to process what he had witnessed. His entire understanding of the universe had been shaken by watching humans do what no other species had ever done. "All right," Vasquez said, her voice calm and steady despite the fear that still lurked in the back of her mind. "Let us assess our situation. Cole, what is the status of the ship?" Cole's voice was weak but clear. "The breach is sealed, but it is not pretty. We lost pressure on Deck 3, and 2 of our backup generators are fried. The main engine is functioning at about 60% capacity. If we push it too hard, we might not have enough power to make it back to the surface." "Weapons?" Vasquez asked, turning to Okonkwo. The soldier shook his head grimly. "We have small arms, a few explosive charges, and 1 plasma lance that was designed for cutting through ice. Nothing that can hurt something that size. We might as well be throwing rocks at a mountain." "What about the creature itself?" Vasquez continued, looking at Tanaka. "What have you learned?" The xenobiologist pulled up her data on the holographic display. "The Hollow is unlike anything in our records," she began, her eyes bright with scientific fascination despite their dire circumstances. "It appears to be a single organism that has been growing for millions, perhaps billions of years. Its body is not entirely physical. It exists partially in normal space and partially in some kind of psychic dimension that we do not fully understand." "That explains the mental attacks," Rivera said quietly. "Yes," Tanaka nodded. "It uses fear as a weapon because fear is its food. Every species it has ever consumed, every mind it has ever broken, all of that terror has made it stronger. It feeds on the psychic energy of dying prey, growing larger and more powerful with each victim. So why did it not break us? Chun asked the question they were all thinking. Vasquez had been considering this ever since the attack, and she thought she finally understood the answer. Because we are different, she said slowly, turning to face her crew. Not stronger, not smarter, just different. Every other species in the galaxy evolved to avoid fear. When they feel terror, their instincts tell them to freeze or flee or surrender. But humans did not evolve that way. She began to pace, her words gaining strength as she spoke. We come from a world where everything was trying to kill us. We were prey animals surrounded by predators bigger and faster and deadlier than ourselves. We should have gone extinct 1,000 times over. But instead of surrendering to fear, we learned to use it. Fear kept us alert, Cole said, understanding dawning in his eyes. It made us careful, made us smart. And when being careful was not enough, we learned to fight back, Okonkwo added, a fierce smile crossing his face. We hunted the things that hunted us. Vasquez nodded. Exactly. Fear is not our enemy. Fear is our oldest friend. It is the voice in our heads that tells us to pay attention, to think faster, to push harder. Every other species runs from terror. Humans run toward it. Sorun finally stirred, his 4 eyes focusing on Vasquez with an expression of pure disbelief. You were saying that your species evolved to be afraid and to fight anyway? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I am saying that we evolved to use fear as fuel, Vasquez replied. The Hollow tried to break us with terror, but terror is something we know. We have been living with it for our entire existence as a species. We are not immune to fear, but we have learned that fear does not have to mean defeat. A long silence followed her words. Then Tanaka spoke up, her voice filled with sudden excitement. If the Hollow feeds on fear, then maybe we can poison it. Everyone turned to look at her. Think about it, she continued, her hands moving rapidly as she explained. Every species it has consumed gave up before the end. Their final moments were filled with pure, helpless terror, exactly the kind of psychic energy it needs. But what if we give it something else? What if we give it rage and defiance and the will to fight? What if instead of feeding it, we make it sick? Okonkwo was already nodding. It has never faced prey that fights back, he said. We saw it during the attack. It was confused when we did not break. It does not know what to do with creatures that get angry instead of scared. So we make it angry, Cole said, struggling to sit up despite his weakness. We hit it hard enough to hurt, and instead of running, we hit it again. The crew looked at each other, and Vasquez could see the same fire burning in all of their eyes. They were still afraid. Only a fool would not be afraid. But they were also determined, and that determination was stronger than any fear. All right, Vasquez said, a grim smile forming on her face. Let us figure out how to hurt this thing. Cole, can you rig the reactor for a directed energy burst? I can try, the engineer replied. If I bypass the safety protocols and focus the output through the main deflector, I might be able to create something like a concentrated plasma blast. It will probably burn out our primary systems, but it will hit hard. Do it. Tanaka, you mentioned synthesizing something earlier. Can you create a toxin that might affect the Hollow? Tanaka nodded. I have been studying the local fauna. Some of them have developed chemical defenses against the Hollow's psychic attacks. If I can concentrate those compounds and modify them for our purposes, I might be able to create something that disrupts its nervous system. Get started. Okonkwo, those harpoons from the hull plating you mentioned. How many can you make? Give me a few hours and I will have enough to make that thing look like a pincushion. The soldier replied with grim satisfaction. Rivera, I need you to find a way to broadcast a signal that might interfere with its psychic abilities. Use everything you learned trying to jam it during the attack." "Yes, Commander." Sorun watched as the humans began their work, transforming their damaged ship into a weapon. He still could not fully comprehend what he was seeing. These creatures should be dead. They should have given up and accepted their fate. Instead, they were planning to fight a monster that had destroyed civilizations. "Why?" he asked Vasquez, the single word carrying the weight of all his confusion. "Why do you refuse to accept what is inevitable? Why do you keep struggling when surrender would be so much easier?" Vasquez paused in her work and looked at the alien with eyes that held centuries of human stubbornness. "Because we are human," she said simply, "and humans do not know how to stop." Outside the cavern, the hollow waited, patient and eternal. It had never lost a hunt in all its endless existence, but it had also never hunted humans before. They had spent 12 hours preparing, working without sleep to transform the adamantine into something that could fight back. Cole had modified the reactor and created a weapon that could fire one devastating blast. Tanaka had synthesized her neurotoxin from the strange creatures of the deep. Okonkwo had fashioned 16 harpoons from hull plating, each one tipped with explosive charges. Rivera had built a psychic jammer that might give them a few precious seconds of mental clarity. They were as ready as they would ever be. But the hollow was done waiting. The first warning came when the cavern walls began to shake. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling as something massive pressed against the rock from outside. The creature could not fit through the entrance, but it did not need to. It was simply going to tear the cavern apart. "Everyone to battle stations!" Vasquez shouted as cracks began to spread across the stone walls. "We are out of time." Chun fired up the engines, and the adamantine surged forward just as the cavern roof collapsed behind them. They burst out into open water and immediately found themselves surrounded by horror. The hollow had spread itself around the cavern like a living net, tentacles and tendrils stretching in every direction, eyes glowing with hunger in the darkness. The psychic assault hit them immediately, stronger than before. The creature was angry now, furious at prey that had dared to hide from it. It bombarded their minds with images of death and despair, with the screams of every being it had ever consumed, with terror so profound that it should have shattered their sanity. But Rivera activated his jammer, and suddenly the mental noise decreased. It did not disappear entirely, but it became bearable, like turning down the volume on a speaker that had been blasting at full power. "It is working!" Rivera shouted in triumph. "Then let us use the time we have." Vasquez replied. "Chun, take us in close. Cole, prepare the plasma blast. Okonkwo, get ready with those harpoons." What happened next would have seemed like insanity to any other species in the galaxy. Instead of fleeing from the monster, the adamantine accelerated directly toward it. Instead of trying to escape, the humans attacked. The first harpoon flew from the ship's modified launcher and buried itself deep in the hollow's flesh. The creature screamed, not with sound but with psychic energy, a wave of shock and pain that made even the jammer struggle to filter it out. It was the first time in millions of years that anything had actually hurt the hollow. Okonkwo fired again and again, sending explosive-tipped harpoons into the creature's body. Each one detonated on impact, tearing chunks of flesh away, leaving wounds that glowed with sickly yellow blood. The hollow thrashed and writhed, its countless eyes fixed on this impossible ship that dared to fight back. But the creature was far from helpless. A massive tendril swept toward the adamantine, and Chun barely managed to dodge it. Another tentacle caught them a glancing blow, sending the ship spinning. Warning lights flashed across every console as systems began to fail. "We cannot keep this up much longer," Chun shouted over the chaos. Vasquez knew she was right. They were hurting the hollow, but they were also taking damage with every passing second. They needed to end this quickly, or they would not survive. And then she saw it. Deep within the creature's writhing mass, there was a point of concentrated light. It pulsed like a heartbeat, and with each pulse, she could feel the psychic assault strengthen. That was the source of its power, the core of its being. "Cole, can you hit that bright spot in its center?" she demanded. The engineer looked at his readings and shook his head. "Not from out here. There is too much flesh in the way. The blast would not penetrate deep enough." "Then we need to get closer," Vasquez said, her voice cold with determination. "We need to get inside." Silence fell over the bridge as her words sank in. Inside, she wanted to fly inside the monster. It was the most insane plan any of them had ever heard. It was also their only chance. "You heard the commander," Okonkwo roared, a wild grin spreading across his face. "We are going in." Chun pulled the ship around and aimed for the largest of the hollow's many mouths. It was a gaping hole surrounded by teeth the size of buildings, a tunnel leading into darkness. Any sane pilot would have turned and fled. Chun punched the throttle and flew straight toward it. The hollow tried to stop them. Tentacles reached for the ship, trying to grab it, crush it, tear it apart. But Okonkwo was ready with his harpoons, blasting away anything that got too close. The ship shook and rattled as they plunged into the creature's maw, surrounded by walls of living flesh. Inside the hollow, everything was worse. The psychic assault was overwhelming, pressing against their minds with crushing force. Rivera's jammer was overloading, sparks flying from the device as it struggled to keep up. And the tunnel ahead of them was getting narrower, the creature trying to squeeze them to death. Tanaka deployed her toxin, releasing it into the air around them. The effect was immediate. The flesh walls began to spasm and twitch, pulling away from the ship as the neurotoxin attacked the creature's nervous system. It was not enough to kill the hollow, but it was enough to keep them alive a few seconds longer. And then Okonkwo saw something that made his heart stop. Ahead of them, the tunnel branched in multiple directions, and there was no way to tell which path led to the creature's core. They could wander these internal passages forever, while the hollow slowly digested them. "I need to go out there," Okonkwo said suddenly. "I need to plant charges along these tunnels and find the right path. It is the only way." Vasquez started to protest, but the look in the soldier's eyes stopped her. He knew what he was asking. He knew he probably would not survive. But he also knew it was the only chance any of them had. "It has been an honor, Commander," Okonkwo said, grabbing a pack of explosives and heading for the airlock. "James," Vasquez called after him, her voice thick with emotion. He turned and smiled. "Give that thing hell for me." Then he was gone, swimming out into the creature's interior, a tiny human figure surrounded by mountains of alien flesh. They watched on the sensors as he planted charge after charge, fighting off attacks from the hollow's internal defenses, getting weaker with every passing moment. And then his voice came over the comm, weak but triumphant. "Found it. Take the third tunnel on the left. Straight shot to the core. I'm going to clear you a path." The explosives detonated in sequence, creating a channel through the creature's body. Okonkwo's signal disappeared in the blast, but his sacrifice had shown them the way. "Go," Vasquez commanded, tears streaming down her face. Chun flew into the tunnel that Okonkwo had opened, and there ahead of them was the core. A pulsing ball of psychic energy surrounded by a membrane of translucent flesh. It was the heart of the hollow, the source of its power, the thing that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years. Cole prepared the plasma blast. They would only get one shot. And the hollow knew it. Its psychic assault reached new heights of intensity, trying desperately to stop them, to break them, to make them give up like every other species before. But they were human, and humans do not give up. Fire! Vasquez screamed. The plasma blast erupted from the adamantine and slammed into the core, and the hollow began to die. Light exploded through the hollow's interior, brighter than 1,000 suns, burning away the darkness that had existed for millions of years. The membrane surrounding the core vaporized instantly, and the pulsing bowl of psychic energy began to collapse in on itself. The creature's death scream was the most terrible sound Commander Vasquez had ever experienced. It was not just noise. It was pure agony broadcast directly into every mind within range. The hollow was dying, and it wanted the entire universe to share its pain. But the scream also meant something wonderful. It meant they had won. The core is destabilizing. Cole shouted over the chaos. We need to get out of here before the whole thing explodes. Chun was already on it, spinning the damaged adamantine around and racing back toward the entrance they had come through. But the creature's death was causing everything to collapse. Tunnels were closing. Flesh was falling from the walls. The entire interior was becoming a nightmare of shifting organic matter. I cannot find the exit. Chun cried in frustration. Everything has changed. Tanaka looked at her sensors and pointed. There. I am detecting water pressure from that direction. It must lead outside. Chun did not hesitate. She flew toward the opening Tanaka had found, weaving between collapsing walls of dying flesh. The ship was falling apart around them, systems failing one by one, but they were so close now. They could not give up when they were this close. They burst through a wall of weakened tissue, and suddenly they were outside, surrounded by open water instead of the creature's interior. Behind them, the hollow was thrashing in its death throes, its massive body twisting and contorting as it collapsed in on itself. Full power to engines, Vasquez commanded. Get us away from that thing. The adamantine climbed desperately toward the surface, its engines screaming in protest. Below them, the hollow was dying, and its death was not quiet. The creature that had terrorized the depths for countless ages was releasing all of its stored psychic energy in one final burst. The shockwave hit them like a giant's fist, sending the ship tumbling end over end. Rivera was thrown from his seat. Cole's console exploded in a shower of sparks. Chun lost control of the flight systems, and they began to fall. But Tanaka grabbed the emergency controls and stabilized their descent. They were still climbing, still moving away from the dying monster below. They were not dead yet. And then, with one final scream that echoed across every psychic frequency in the galaxy, the hollow went silent. Vasquez looked at the sensors and saw something she had never expected to see. The creature was sinking, its massive body falling into the deepest parts of the ocean, lifeless and still. The thing that had killed 47 expeditions, the monster that had consumed entire fleets, the horror that had haunted the depths of Kithra X for millions of years was finally dead. We did it, Rivera whispered, disbelief clear in his voice. We actually did it. For a long moment, no one spoke. They were all too exhausted, too overwhelmed, too amazed to find words. They had faced the ultimate terror, and they had survived. They had done what every species in the galaxy had said was impossible. Sauron was the first to break the silence. The alien had been quiet throughout the final battle, watching everything with his 4 wide eyes. Now he spoke, and his voice was filled with an emotion that humans might have called reverence. I have witnessed something today that I cannot explain, he said slowly. I have watched beings made of soft flesh and fragile bone defeat a god of terror. I have seen creatures who should have died refuse to accept death. I have learned that everything I thought I knew about the universe was wrong. He turned to Vasquez, and there were tears in his alien eyes. My people will not believe this when I tell them. The Galactic Council will think I have gone mad. But I know what I saw. I saw humans look into the face of absolute horror and refuse to look away. I saw them take their fear and transform it into something more powerful than any weapon. Vasquez placed a hand on the alien's shoulder. We were afraid, she admitted. We were terrified the entire time. We lost good people down here. But being afraid does not mean being helpless. It just means you have something worth fighting for. The climb to the surface took hours. The adamantine was barely functional, held together by emergency repairs and pure determination. But Chen was a miracle worker, coaxing every last bit of power from the damaged engines, keeping them moving when the ship should have fallen apart. They rose through the layers of the alien ocean, past the bioluminescent creatures that had seemed so strange on their descent, past the wrecks of the expeditions that had come before, past the memories of all the beings who had died in this darkness. They rose toward the light, and finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they broke through the ice and emerged into the cold starlight of space. Cole managed to restore basic communications just as they reached the surface, and Rivera immediately began broadcasting their status. This is the Earth vessel Adamantine calling the Galactic Council. We are requesting emergency assistance. Our ship is damaged, but we are alive. Repeat, we are alive. The response came almost immediately, and the voice on the other end was filled with shock. Adamantine, this is Council Station 7. We are receiving your signal. Please confirm your status. Are you saying that you descended into the depths of Kithra X and survived? Vasquez took the communicator from Rivera. This is Commander Elena Vasquez. We did more than survive. The entity you call the Hollow is dead. We killed it. The depths of Kithra X are safe. There was a long pause before the response came. Commander, that is impossible. No species has ever survived the Hollow. You must be mistaken. Sorwin gently took the communicator from Vasquez. His voice was calm and certain as he spoke. This is Sorwin of the Vethkai. I was aboard the Adamantine as an observer. I witnessed everything that happened. The humans are telling the truth. The Hollow is dead. Another pause, longer this time. Then the voice returned, and now it was trembling. How? How did they do it? Sorwin looked at the exhausted human crew around him. At Cole, still wrapped in blankets but smiling. At Tanaka, already making notes for her scientific report. At Chun, slumped over her controls in exhausted triumph. At Rivera, young and proud and forever changed by what he had experienced. And at Vasquez, who had led them all through the impossible. They did it because they are human, Sorun said simply. And humans do not know how to surrender. Send no more Vethkai expeditions to dangerous places. Send no more warriors from other species. If you wish to explore the horrors of the universe, send the humans. They were made for this. Vasquez smiled tiredly and took back the communicator. Adamantine out, she said. We are coming home. She looked out the viewport at the stars that surrounded them, so bright and beautiful after the darkness of the depths. They had lost good people down there. Williams and Park and Okonkwo would never see these stars again. Their sacrifice would be remembered forever. But they had won. They had faced the ultimate terror, and they had won. And somewhere out there, among all those countless stars, there were more horrors waiting. More challenges to overcome. More impossibilities to make possible. And humanity would be ready for all of them. The Adamantine turned toward home, its engines coughing and sputtering, its hull scarred and battered. But its crew was alive, and its mission was complete. The abyss had stared into humanity, and humanity had stared right back.